In a small town where everyone knows your name, life seems simple, until it's not. Join us on a gripping journey of love, betrayal, and the devastating power of revenge in this intense story of Ryan Miller. From the quiet streets of Willow Creek to the ruthless battles of the heart, Ryan's world is turned upside down as he uncovers dark secrets and faces an enemy closer than he ever imagined. If you love stories filled with twists, suspense, and raw emotion, this is one you won't want to miss. Welcome to a tale where loyalty is tested, and nothing is as it seems. I grew up in Willow Creek, a small town where everybody knew your name. My dad, Frank, ran Miller's Auto Repair, and my mom, Linda, kept our home warm and welcoming. I had an older sister, Sarah. We had the usual sibling rivalry, but she always looked out for me. Life was simple back then, filled with days helping out at the garage or playing ball with friends. My parents instilled in us the values of hard work and honesty, and for the most part, my life was pretty straightforward. Things took a turn when I started high school at St. Andrew's Academy, a prestigious all-boys prep school. My parents believed in the power of education, so off I went. It was there that I got my first real taste of social class differences. The wealthy kids never let me forget I was just a middle-class kid trying to fit in, which often led to verbal and physical fights. Despite the odds, I held my own. It was during this time that I met Mark Davis, a boxer who would become my best friend and change my life. Why do people do what they do? It's a question I often find myself pondering, especially when it comes to those I love. My wife, Ashley, thinks I'm oblivious to her infidelity, but the truth is, I've known for a while. My upbringing was normal: loving parents, a sister, and a strong emphasis on education. That's why I ended up at St. Andrew's, a strict, all-boys school obsessed with football, faith, and academics. Being middle class among the sons of millionaires was tough, and I never quite found my place. The rich kids, with their silver spoons and superiority complexes, loved to target me, leading to more than a few brawls. To blow off steam, I joined a boxing class at the downtown boxing gym, a decision that changed everything. I met kids like me, and more importantly, I met Mark Davis. He was this talented boxer, son of a cop, and we hit it off immediately, especially after I recovered from the initial knockout he gave me in the ring. We were inseparable. Mark also ended up at St. Andrew's, thanks to his dad's connections, and together, we took care of the bully problem. One day, this jerk, Ethan Campbell, insulted my family, and I snapped. Broken nose, a couple of teeth on the floor, the whole 9 yards. Mark, always the loyal friend, had my back and took care of Ethan's buddies while I handled him. Mark was a good guy, kind to his friends, but ruthless to his enemies. We ended up facing a few more of Ethan's cronies after that, but it was nothing we couldn't handle. They'd pulled this crap on me before, and I always tried to think up some grand revenge scheme, but it never really amounted to much. This time, though, I'd made a mistake. I'd made an enemy of someone rich and powerful. Ethan's father, Richard Campbell, was a big-shot real estate developer, and he was furious. He got Mark, everyone called him Stone by then, and I was suspended for the rest of the year, even though there was only a month left of school. He even tried to press assault charges. Luckily, some girls from the neighboring school had witnessed the whole thing and backed up our story. Ethan had started it. Stone's dad, being the deputy chief of police, also helped smooth things over. The assault charges were dropped, but the suspension was upheld. Richard Campbell even tried to get my parents to pay for Ethan's medical bills. I spent that summer working at Miller's Auto Repair, keeping my nose clean. Stone and I hung out, hit the gym, and went running. He even tried to make a move on Sarah, but she was headed off to college and wasn't interested. Life went on pretty much the same way throughout high school. Ethan Campbell swore revenge, but I knew it wouldn't be anything physical, not after what Stone and I had done to him. Stone became the state heavyweight boxing champ, and I wasn't too shabby myself, placing in the top 10. He'd thought about going pro but decided against it. He didn't want to end up like his uncle, a bitter, broken man who'd left everything he had in the ring. Our senior year, we started dating girls from the school across town. We had our driver's licenses by then, so we spent a lot of time cruising around. I lost my virginity to Jessica Harper, but it wasn't love, just a good time. Meanwhile, Ethan Campbell had never forgotten or forgiven me for the humiliation. He had everything: money, looks, power, but the only time he seemed truly happy was when he was making someone else miserable. He started dating Jessica, thinking it would be the ultimate revenge, believing I was in love with her. Honestly, I wasn't too bothered. Stone and I eventually decided that the army was our best option. My family couldn't afford to send me to college, so we enlisted together, missing prom because of basic training. Not that we cared much about missing prom. I realized pretty quickly that the army wasn't for me, at least not beyond my initial commitment. Stone, on the other hand, thrived in the service. He was aiming for special forces. After basic, I went back home before starting officer candidate school. Stone gave me a hard time about going officer, but I knew I could hack it. Plus, it was a path to a business degree. It was the first time in years that Stone and I would be apart, and I had no idea it would be so many years before I saw him again. Officer training went smoothly, and I graduated as Second Lieutenant Ryan Miller. The business degree I wanted required a longer service commitment, so I ended up signing on for another 3 years. I got assigned to the Army History Unit, which meant a lot of office work. It wasn't so bad, though. I learned a lot about Army traditions and history from a great sergeant major. I hadn't heard from Stone in a while. He was deployed somewhere doing God knows what. I worried about him, but I knew he was well trained and could handle himself. Meanwhile, I found a comfortable stability in my routine. Studying for my degree, working out, hitting the boxing gym whenever I could. The only thing missing was a good woman. I dated, I had my flings, but I hadn't met anyone I really connected with. At least, not until everything changed. I went back home for a music festival weekend, planning to visit my folks, Stone's parents, and catch up with some old friends over a few beers. Friday night, I got caught up on all the local news. Dad was thinking about selling Miller's Auto Repair and retiring. Stone's dad, Tom, had finally been made police chief. They hadn't heard from Stone in a while either. Special forces, they sure like to keep their whereabouts a secret. Saturday morning, after a run and breakfast, I was helping Dad open up the garage when who should walk in but Jessica Harper, now Jessica Harper Campbell. She was in town for the festival with her cousin, Ashley. Jessica mentioned that Ethan was overseas on business and introduced me to Ashley. She was stunning. We made plans to meet up at the festival later. Dad got a kick out of Jessica flirting up a storm, even though she was married, but I only had eyes for Ashley. After catching up with some friends, I headed over to the festival grounds. I found Jessica, drunk as a skunk, hitting on anything that moved, while Ashley sat beside her looking beyond uncomfortable. I joined them, bought a round of drinks and some food, and endured Jessica's endless chatter about her oh-so-perfect life. Apparently, she and Ethan had gotten married right after graduation. Probably a shotgun wedding, knowing Ethan. Jessica hinted that there'd been a pregnancy that ended badly. Now Ethan was managing his father's international business deals. Eventually, Jessica wandered off with some guy named Jason Roberts to check out his car, and Ashley, visibly relieved, cracked a joke about her cousin's antics. We spent the rest of the evening getting to know each other. Turns out, we had a lot in common. Ashley worked as a human resources manager at Campbell Corporation, thanks to Jessica, of course. We exchanged numbers and made a date for the following week. Things moved quickly after that. 2 years and countless dates later, Ashley and I were practically inseparable. She was a little more traditional and wanted to wait until marriage, which was frustrating, but it gave us time to build a strong emotional connection. We made it work, despite Jessica's occasional intrusions and the ever-looming shadow of Ethan Campbell. We made it work, though. Ashley's parents, despite being wealthier, accepted me. Her dad, being a retired general and all, and I had that military background in common. After I finally finished my degree, I popped the question, and Ashley said yes. Her dad gave us his blessing, but her mother, less than thrilled, insisted on a prenup. I'm pretty sure Ethan put her up to that. The wedding went smoothly. Stone couldn't make it, something about being deployed, but his younger brother stepped in as my best man. Ethan, thankfully, was stuck overseas. It was a wonderful day, made even better by the fact that Ashley and I were just as compatible in bed as we were out of it. Life was good. We bought a nice house in the suburbs and started making plans for the future. We both wanted kids, but first, I had to figure out what I wanted to do about the army. Should I stay in or try my luck as a civilian? We agreed that I should at least use my degree for a while. I started looking around and got lucky. I landed a job with Bank of America, overseeing their security, internal and external. The pay was double what I was making in the army, so I put in my papers and left the service. We started trying for a family right away, but nothing happened. After months of disappointment, we went to a doctor, and I got tested. Turns out, I was sterile. I was devastated, but I planned to break the news to Ashley gently. I even booked us a cruise, thinking a little getaway would soften the blow. Then, everything changed. Ashley got promoted, which was fantastic, but the job came with a catch. She'd be traveling a lot, with Ethan Campbell, her new boss. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing, but I didn't want to seem insecure. "Don't worry," Ashley had said. "Ethan's change. It's all business." Yeah, right. The morning Ashley left for her business trip, Ethan showed up to pick her up in a limo. He had this smug grin plastered across his face as they drove away. I spent the next few days moping around, trying not to think about Ashley and Ethan being off together. Ashley called a few times, always saying everything was fine. Then, on Saturday morning, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there stood Stone. He looked different, tougher, more world-weary. But then again, that's what war does to you. We hugged, grabbed some beers, and caught up. Stone told me he'd gotten out of the army after 10 years. He was tired of all the killing. I filled him in on my life, including the whole Ethan connection. We both had a good laugh about him marrying Jessica. Then I showed Stone some wedding photos. He took one look at a picture of Ashley's dad and froze. "That's General Harper. He was my commanding officer in the Special Forces." My blood ran cold. "Why didn't you say something at the wedding?" Stone hesitated. "Let's just say we didn't exactly see eye to eye. And Mrs. Harper, well, let's just say she had a reputation. Affairs with officers, mostly. The general retired to avoid a scandal." My head was spinning. The family I'd married into. I invited Stone to stay the night, but he had something important to do. "I start training at the police academy on Monday," he said before heading out. He promised to visit again when Ashley got back. I couldn't stop thinking about what Stone had said about the Harpers. It made me worry even more about Ashley and Ethan. But the week flew by. Work kept me busy, and Ashley called a few times. By Friday night, she was home. She seemed like her usual self, and we had a great night together. The next day, I told Ashley about Stone coming back to town and that I'd arranged for them to meet. Later that evening, Stone showed up with flowers and a bottle of wine. I was about to introduce him to Ashley when she gasped. "Oh my God, Mark, you're Stone?" "Hey, Ashley. It's good to see you again." I just stood there, completely stunned. Turns out, Ashley and Stone knew each other from way back when her dad was stationed at Fort Benning. They spent the next few hours catching up, completely oblivious to me. I felt like a third wheel in my own home. Later, as I was making dinner, I overheard them talking in hushed tones. "Does he know?" Ashley asked. "Know what?" I asked, stepping into the room. They both looked incredibly uncomfortable. Stone made a quick exit, saying that Ashley and I needed to talk. Ashley explained that she and Stone had dated briefly back at Fort Benning. Her dad had even approved. But then Stone was shipped off to Iraq, and they decided to break things off. "It was a lifetime ago, Ryan," she said. "I was a different person then. I love you, only you." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Stone still had feelings for her. It would explain why he'd skipped our wedding. I confronted Stone about it later that night. He apologized, saying he hadn't wanted to stir up the past. I accepted his explanation, but I couldn't help but feel hurt and angry that they hadn't been upfront with me from the start. I accepted Stone's explanation, and life went on. Ashley was busier than ever at work, with her new promotion and all. Kids took a backseat. I didn't even bring up the whole sterility thing. Stone, meanwhile, had aced the police academy and joined the narcotics squad. He was a natural. Things weren't so great on the home front. The spark between Ashley and me seemed to be fading. Our sex life was practically non-existent. She was always working late, and she was traveling even more with Ethan. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I needed time to think. My dad was finally ready to sell Miller's Auto Repair and retire. So I told Ashley I was going to spend a couple of weeks helping him close up shop. She was fine with it, said she was swamped with work anyway. I hadn't been back in Willow Creek for a full day before my dad sat me down for a little man-to-man talk. "You need to protect yourself, son," he'd said. He went on to tell me that there were rumors about Ashley. Rumors that she was acting a lot like her cousin, Jessica. "Ethan's been bragging all over town about sleeping with her 3 times a week," he says. "At least that's what I heard." I was furious. It was one thing to have my suspicions, but hearing it confirmed hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been played for a fool. I decided I was going straight to the source, Jessica Harper Campbell. I drove over to the Harper estate, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Is Ethan sleeping with my wife?" I asked bluntly. Jessica looked startled. "Don't get all macho with me, Ryan Miller," she spat back. "Like you own her." "It's all over town, Jessica." To my surprise, Jessica broke down. She admitted that she and Ethan were separated, that she'd moved back in with her parents, and that divorce was imminent. Turns out, their marriage had been a sham from the start. Ethan was a serial cheater, even keeping a swanky apartment in the city for his little flings. Jessica, not to be outdone, had started having affairs of her own. It was all just a big game of tit for tat. Then Ethan had the nerve to tell her that he was involved with Ashley, that it was serious, and that it was only a matter of time before she moved in. That was Jessica's breaking point. She left. We talked for a while longer, but I was beyond sympathy for her. Jessica swore she was going to make Ethan pay. Me? I wanted revenge too, but I wanted it my way. When I got back to my parents' house, they were out. Ashley had left a note saying she needed to talk to me, urgently. I ignored her calls, grabbed a beer, and went outside to sit on the deck. My parents came home later that evening. I had a few more beers, then called it a night. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of my mom's famous pancakes. We had a quiet breakfast together before I headed over to the garage. Dad and I spent the morning finishing up the last of the paperwork, then we went fishing at our favorite spot by the lake. "You need to confront her, son," Dad said. "Get your answers." We got back to the house, and there was Ashley's BMW in the driveway. I found her in the living room, sitting with my mom, a box of tissues on the coffee table. My parents left, giving us some privacy. Ashley immediately launched into a tearful explanation. Apparently, Jessica had called her, told her that she and Ethan were getting a divorce, and that Ashley knew all about their little, late-night meetings. Ashley swore that she wasn't having an affair with Ethan, that those meetings had been perfectly innocent. She said it was all Jessica's doing, trying to break us up. "I'll stop meeting him after work," Ashley promised. "I'll do anything. Just please, Ryan, don't do this. Don't shut me out." Her story seemed well rehearsed. I didn't buy it for a second. I knew Jessica didn't give a damn about me, and Ethan, well, Ethan hated me. Plus, there was that whole thing about the Harper women and their reputations. I realized then that Ashley had become the enemy. But I needed proof, hard evidence, before I confronted her. I put on a good show, pretending to forgive her. We even went out for dinner that night, acting like nothing had changed. Ashley left the next morning, cheerful and oblivious to my suspicions. As soon as she was gone, I called Stone. I needed his help. "Can you put some eyes on Ashley for me? Just for a few days? I need to know what she's up to." "No problem, brother," Stone had said without hesitation. "I'll make some calls." I called my dad, told him I decided to stay in Willow Creek through the weekend. I needed a little more time to get my ducks in a row. After packing up my car, I said goodbye to my folks and headed back to Seattle. Stone still hadn't called me back by the time I got to the city. I tried not to worry. He was probably just busy. I checked into a hotel on the outskirts of town, far enough away from anyone we knew. Then I went to work and sweet-talked my boss into giving me another week off. Luckily, he owed me one. While I was at it, I went to the bank and opened a new account in my name only. I transferred half the money from our joint account, just in case. I felt a little better, knowing I had some financial security. Back at the hotel, I tried Stone again, but still no answer. I went down to the bar, ordered a beer, and ended up chatting with the bartender for a while. My dad called to check in. After a couple more beers, I called it a night. I paid my tab and went up to my room to shower and change. I was starving and about to head out for a late dinner when Stone finally called back. "Sorry, brother, been swamped. Just made detective, so things are a little hectic." "Congrats, man, that's awesome," I said, genuinely happy for him. We agreed to meet at a bar downtown. When I got there, the place was crawling with cops, clearly Stone's usual haunt. We found a booth in the back, ordered some beers, and I told him everything, the rumors, the late-night meetings, Ashley's strange behavior. Stone listened patiently. When I was finished, he grinned. "So, you want me to pay Ethan a little visit? Rough him up? Maybe teach him a lesson about keeping his hands off other men's wives?" We both laughed, but then we got serious. We needed proof. I couldn't exactly accuse Ashley of anything without it. Stone said he'd take care of it. He had his ways. The next morning, I woke up with a splitting headache. I called my work and canceled my leave request, then called Ashley and told her I was coming home. She was waiting for me at the door when I got back. "I missed you so much," she said, giving me a long, passionate kiss. We had dinner, and afterward, Ashley surprised me by suggesting we start trying for a family again. I knew it was pointless, but I didn't say anything. Weeks went by, and I started to get anxious. Still no word from Stone. One day, Ashley asked me about our bank account. Apparently, she'd noticed the missing money. I lied and told her I'd lent some money to my dad. She seemed to buy it, thank God. Early December, Stone called. "Got news for you. Meet me at the Rusty Nail." When I got to the bar, Stone was already there, nursing a beer. He slid an envelope across the table. "Good news, brother. Ashley's clean. The PI. The report says she's been faithful. Just living her life, going to work, coming home. You were right to trust her." I felt a surge of relief. Ashley wasn't cheating. Ethan, on the other hand. Stone continued. Total mess. Multiple women, gambling debts, a nasty little pill habit. Word on the street is that he's about to get busted for possession, cocaine. Should make for some interesting headlines, considering who his daddy is. It was the perfect Christmas gift, for me, anyway. I bought a round for the bar, then headed home to my wife. Stone said he'd stop by over the weekend. I walked through the door, and Ashley was all over me. We hadn't been intimate in weeks, but that night, it was like old times. Passionate, intense, almost desperate. Afterward, Ashley rolled over and snuggled close to me. "You're going to be a father?" she whispered. I must have gone white as a sheet. Ashley took my shock for excitement. "I'm pregnant." She beamed. "I wanted to wait until after the first trimester to tell you, just to be sure. But I couldn't keep it in any longer." She launched into a mile-a-minute monologue about nurseries and baby showers and maternity leave. I just zoned out. It hit me then, like a punch to the gut. I was being played. I was sterile. There was no way that baby was mine. Ashley had to go. But I had to be smart about this. I couldn't just kick her out, not yet. I needed a plan. How could she possibly think she could pass this baby off as mine? Our sex life had been non-existent for months. I tossed and turned all night, watching Ashley sleep beside me, her chest rising and falling with each breath. My anger was a living, breathing thing inside me. I got out of bed and went downstairs to study. I even considered other options. More permanent ones. But I knew I couldn't do that. Not yet, anyway. I needed a plan. My life was built on a foundation of lies. Ashley was a cheater. Stone had betrayed me too. And Ethan Campbell, he was just a pawn in all of this. I was surrounded by enemies. First things first, I had to get in touch with Ethan. The next morning, I got up early and called Ethan's office, leaving an urgent message with his assistant. By mid-morning, it was clear he wasn't going to call me back. I couldn't risk going to Campbell Corporation and running into Ashley or someone who knew us, so I decided to tail him. I rented an SUV, parked down the street from his office, and waited. Sure enough, around lunchtime, Ethan emerged, looking dapper as ever. I followed him to a high-rise apartment building downtown. This was my chance. I waited until Ethan was halfway across the parking garage, then I pulled up alongside him. "Get in," I barked. Ethan jumped a mile, eyes wide with terror. He thought I was going to kill him. "Just drive," I said. "We need to talk." I directed him to a secluded spot by the lake. We got out of the car, and I tossed him the PI report Stone had given me. Ethan's face turned even paler as he read it. "It's all lies," he hissed. "Jessica put them up to this. She's trying to ruin me." "This report wasn't from Jessica," I said, my voice dangerously low. "It was from Mark Davis." Ethan's eyes widened in recognition. He knew he was in over his head. I could tell he was still convinced I was going to kill him. He nearly fainted when I told him I didn't believe half the crap in the report. "Except for the part about you cheating on your wife," I added. "That I believe." Then I really blew his mind. "We need to help each other," I said. Ethan, the arrogant playboy, was now a pathetic, whimpering mess. He might have been a jerk, but he was still vulnerable. I told him he needed to disappear, like, yesterday. "Stone is setting you up, Ethan," I said. "He's going to get you busted. You'll be public enemy number one. And that's the least of your problems." Ethan was bewildered. "Why are you helping me? And why is Davis doing this?" "Let's just say I need some answers," I said. "And the only one who can give them to me is your father. I need you to put me in touch with him." Ethan made the call. His father, Richard Campbell, reluctantly agreed to meet with me. He listened to my story, or at least, the parts one wanted him to hear. When I was finished, he agreed to provide me with a full report on Mark Davis, everything he had. "It'll take a few days," he'd said. Ethan looked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and relief. "Why are you doing this?" he asked again. I didn't have a good answer for him. Not then, anyway. I watched as Ethan, pale and shaken, was whisked away by his father's security detail. He was leaving the country, and buying me some time to figure out what the hell was going on. I had a hunch that Stone was behind all of this, some kind of twisted revenge plot. But why? I waited with Ethan until his ride arrived. Sending him out of the country would definitely throw a wrench in Stone's plans, whatever those were, and buy me some time. I drove back to the city, returned the SUV, and tried to lay low. I needed a break from everything. Luckily, work provided the perfect excuse. I volunteered for an assignment that sent me out to our regional offices for a couple of weeks. Ashley wasn't thrilled about my sudden departure, but I reminded her that I needed to stay on the boss's good side, especially with the baby on the way. That shut her up quickly. The 2 weeks flew by. I still hadn't heard from Richard Campbell. Finally, on my last day out of town, a courier arrived with a thick envelope. The report on Mark Davis. I spent half the night reading it, pausing every now and then for a stiff drink. The more I learned, the more disturbed I became. The Stone I knew, the fearless kid from Willow Creek, was long gone. This Mark Davis was a different breed, a product of a brutal childhood, shaped by violence and loss. The report laid it all out. Stone had witnessed his own mother's murder when he was just a kid. His father and stepmother, desperate to manage his rage, had enrolled him in boxing. It was a successful strategy, at least for a while. Stone channeled his anger into becoming a champion. But the man he had become, he was far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The report answered all my questions, and then some. But it didn't offer any comfort. I was just collateral damage in a war that had been raging for years. A war one didn't even know I was a part of. Worse, if Stone ever found out I knew the truth about him, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate me. There wasn't much of note in the report until Stone joined the army. Then it all started to make sense. I knew about basic training, of course. We'd been through that together. But it was the Special Forces training, that's where things took a dark turn. The key figure in Stone's transformation was General William Harper, Ashley's father. He'd been Stone's commanding officer, and they clashed constantly. Harper was ruthless, believed in winning at all costs. Stone, on the other hand, had a strong moral compass. He valued righteousness and loyalty, especially when it came to his men. Their biggest conflict stemmed from Stone's relationship with Ashley. Stone had initially pursued her despite Harper, but it quickly became something more. Ashley, it turned out, resembled Stone's late mother, which only deepened his feelings for her. Things fell apart when Stone asked Ashley to marry him, and she refused. She said she needed her father's approval. Soon after, Harper volunteered Stone's unit for a series of increasingly dangerous missions, culminating in a disastrous operation that left several men dead or wounded, including Stone. Harper was forced to retire in disgrace. Ashley, heartbroken but terrified of her father, broke things off with Stone for good. Stone swore revenge, and when he found out I was marrying Ashley, he saw an opportunity. He left the army, became a cop in Seattle, and set his plan in motion. He would seduce Ashley, get her pregnant, and expose their affair to the world, ruining her reputation and destroying her family. His ultimate goal, to use Richard Campbell's influence to destroy General Harper. After framing Ethan, but I derailed Stone's plans by helping Ethan disappear. I knew Stone would come after me once he figured out what I'd done. My first move was to get Ashley out of the line of fire. I convinced her to take a last-minute business trip, hoping that putting some distance between them would buy me some time. Then came the hard part, deciding what I was going to do. Did I stay and face Stone? Or did I disappear before this whole thing escalated? I went back to our house, hoping to find some answers, but it was eerily quiet. Our dog, a goofy golden retriever named Sam, was gone. So were most of Ashley's clothes. I found a note on the kitchen counter, scrawled in Ashley's handwriting. Gone to a business meeting. Sam's at your parents'. See you soon. Love you. It felt off, staged, like she knew I'd be looking for clues. My gut told me she was with Stone. I called the station, pretending to be checking in on my buddy, Detective Davis. The dispatcher told me that Davis was on a 2-week vacation. Great, just great. Maybe I was overreacting? Maybe Ashley really was at a business meeting? I decided to call Richard Campbell. If anyone knew what Stone was up to, it would be him. The old man answered on the second ring. What do you want, Miller? He snarled. You get my report? Yeah, thanks for that. A week late, but I appreciate it. Then why are you wasting my time? Shouldn't you be out buying baby clothes? I'm trying to get in touch with my wife, I said, my voice tight. Ashley, Miller. You know, the woman your son is screwing? Campbell laughed, a harsh, grating sound. How's married life treating you, son? Let me guess, she's working late again? Big, important meetings with the new CEO? The new CEO? Brett White. He's keeping her seat warm until Ethan gets back, if he ever gets back. Campbell couldn't resist one last jab. No doubt White's giving her the grand tour as we speak, the bedroom included. He hung up before I could respond. Ashley had been telling the truth. So where the hell was Stone? I got my answer the next morning. I woke up with a new sense of determination. This charade was over. I was done. Let Stone have Ashley and the Harper family fortune. I was out. I'd loved her once, but that love had died a slow, agonizing death. Revenge was tempting, but my sanity, my life, mattered more. Ashley called while I was in the shower. I ignored it. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not while I could still hear the anger in my voice. After a quick shower and a cup of coffee, I headed to work. I called a lawyer, made an appointment for that afternoon, then I went to the bank and cleaned out my accounts. I wanted every penny I had on hand, just in case. At 10 a.m., my world shifted again. A courier arrived with a package. My name was scrawled across the front in familiar handwriting. Inside, I found a videotape and 2 notes. The first was brief, chilling, I know. It was written in what looked like blood. The second was a news clipping. Campbell Corporation CEO found dead. The article went on to describe how Ethan Campbell had been found dead on a beach in Malibu. The police were investigating, but so far, it was being treated as a suicide. I didn't need to watch the video. I knew what it contained. Ethan's confession. Stone had gotten to him. My military training kicked in. I walked out of the office, ignoring my secretary's protests, and drove. I had 3 very clear thoughts in my head. Ethan had confessed. Stone knew where to find me. And Stone was going to kill me. I got in my car and headed straight for Malibu. David Thompson, my old first sergeant from the Army History Unit, lived there. He'd retired a few years back and had a reputation for knowing people. People who could make problems disappear. I hated dragging him into this, but I was out of options. David was on the deck of his beachfront house, nursing a beer, when I pulled up. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Lieutenant Miller, what brings you here?" "I need your help, Top. I need to disappear. Like, yesterday. No questions asked." David, bless his soul, didn't hesitate. He made a quick phone call, then led me inside. "We'll get you sorted out, son," he assured me, clapping me on the shoulder. He took me downstairs, where a guy was setting up a makeshift photography studio. I got my picture taken, driver's license, passport, the works, while David filled out paperwork. An hour later, I had a new name, Jake Carter. We spent the rest of the evening catching up, carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. As I tried to relax, my thoughts drifted to Ashley. Was she safe? I had to warn her. I borrowed David's phone and dialed her cell. She answered on the second ring. "Ashley, listen to me. This is important. Get your things and get out of there. Right now. And don't go home. Not to your parents, not to our place. Just go. Do you understand?" Ashley laughed, a light, carefree sound that made my blood run cold. "Ryan, is that you? Are you drunk? What are you talking about?" "Ashley, I'm serious. Get away from Stone. Run." "Run? Why would I run? Mark's on vacation. We were just—" "Ashley, I know everything. About the baby, about Stone. He's not who you think he is. You've been warned." I hung up, my heart pounding, and smashed David's phone against the wall, just to be safe. I didn't know if Ashley had believed me, but I'd done all I could. I worried about my parents too, but I had a sinking feeling that Stone was laser-focused on Ashley, General Harper, and me. I spent a restless night at David's, haunted by nightmares. The next morning, I paid a small fortune for my new identity, said goodbye to David, and hit the road. He promised to keep my old ID and the report safe, just in case. David was setting me up with a new car and a burner phone, but first, Ryan Miller had to die. One of my soldiers back at the history unit had told me about his hometown, a backwater town in the middle of nowhere called Deadwood. Corrupt police force, barely any internet service, but hardly any violent crime. It was the perfect place to disappear. That night, I stopped at a town a few miles from Deadwood and found what I was looking for. A dingy little building with a flickering neon sign that read, County Morgue. I knocked on the back door, and a skinny guy with bloodshot eyes peered out. A couple $100 convinced him to let me inside and show me the inventory. I found one that would work, a John Doe, close enough in size and built for me. Another 100 bought his silence. He even told me he'd be working Saturday night. Perfect. I got to Deadwood late Friday night and checked into the only motel in town, a rundown place called the Dusty Trail. I made sure to be extra chatty with the owner, a tired-looking woman with a smoker's cough, so she'd remember me. The next morning, I made the rounds, introducing myself as Jake Carter to anyone who would listen. I even had coffee with the mayor, a portly man with a bad comb-over, and told him I was thinking about relocating to Deadwood. Peaceful, quiet, good for the soul, that sort of thing. After breakfast, I found the perfect spot, a notorious cliff a few miles outside of town, overlooking a dry creek bed. People said it was haunted, that the ghosts of heartbroken lovers whispered in the wind. It was also the site of more than a few accidents. Next, I needed transportation for Saturday night. I found a beat-up old dirt bike for sale at a farm a few miles outside of town. The owner seemed surprised that anyone would want the thing, but he happily took my cash. I tossed it in the back of my truck. Later, I had a late lunch at the diner and met the sheriff, a guy named Baxter. He seemed more interested in the cherry pie than upholding the law. He tried to steer me toward a bar on the edge of town, but something about the way he described it made me think I should steer clear. That night, I found a bar on the other side of Deadwood. It was crowded and smoky, but the beer was cold, and the people seemed friendly enough. I bought a few rounds for the house, told some jokes, and by the end of the night, I was everyone's new best friend. This would do nicely. I drove out to the cliff, stashed my dirt bike helmet and a change of clothes in the bushes, then headed back to the motel. I slept like a log. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Everything was in place. After a leisurely breakfast at the diner, more small talk, another generous tip, I went back to the motel. I killed time watching TV and going over my plan. Lunch at the local diner, more forced conversation, another big tip. By early evening, it was time. I drove to the morgue, parked around back, and waited. Sure enough, the night attendant, looking even more worse for wear than before, showed up right on schedule. He disappeared around the side of the building a few minutes later. Probably to chase his pills with a bottle of cheap whiskey. I picked the lock on the back door and slipped inside. Grabbed the John Doe, confirmed there were no security cameras I needed to worry about. 20 minutes later, I was back on the road, heading for the cliff. I parked the truck on the shoulder, about 100 yards from the edge, then doubled back to the motel. Quick shower, change of clothes, and then I left everything behind, wallet, phone, keys, scattered around the room, just like a drunk guy might. The bar was packed, just as I'd hoped. The locals welcomed me with open arms, remembering the generous out-of-towner from the night before. I bought drinks, and acted progressively drunker as the night wore on. Started buying shots for everyone, though I only took a sip of mine, discreetly pouring the rest into a nearby potted plant when no one was looking. To everyone else, it looked like I was having a hell of a time. The bartender, a burly guy with a handlebar mustache, pulled me aside. "You sure you're okay to drive, buddy?" he asked, looking concerned. I laughed, a little too loudly. Thinking fast, I pulled out my remaining cash, slapped it down on the bar, and yelled, "Drinks for everyone. It's a celebration." As the crowd surged toward the bar, I slipped out the back door. I stumbled toward my truck, weaving a little for good measure, and kept the act up until I was out of sight. Then I floored it, heading for the cliff. I reached the spot where I'd stashed my things, parked the truck, and dragged John Doe's body out of the bushes. I stripped down to my boxers, dressed the body in my clothes, then doused both the body and the inside of the truck with whiskey. I opened the gas tank, shoved a fuel-soaked rag in there, then climbed behind the wheel. I took one last look around, then put the truck in drive. As the truck rolled towards the edge of the cliff, I flicked on my lighter and tossed it over my shoulder. The rag ignited, and the truck, engulfed in flames, exploded as it plunged into the canyon. I hopped on my dirt bike and rode off into the night. The next morning, I rolled into Malibu, exhausted but exhilarated. David was waiting for me at the beach house. He had a beat-up old pickup truck waiting for me, along with a duffel bag full of supplies. "Figured you could use this," he said, tossing me the keys. David had a proposition for me. My dad had a cabin up in Montana. Remote, off the grid, place called Last Chance. Figured you might want to lay low for a while. Last chance. Ironic, considering the circumstances. I told him it sounded perfect. Before I left, David handed me a burner phone. "Keep it turned off unless you're expecting a message from me. And if you get an emergency text, you drop everything and disappear. Got it?" "Got it." I hugged David goodbye, climbed into the truck, and pointed it north. The drive to Last Chance took the better part of 2 days. The directions David had given me were easy enough to follow, though. I pulled up to the cabin around lunchtime the following day. It was everything David had promised: isolated, rustic, the perfect place to hide from the world. I spent the next few weeks settling in. I grew a beard, started wearing old clothes, and tried to make myself as inconspicuous as possible. David had stocked the cabin with enough food and supplies to last a month, and I had a feeling I wouldn't need to go into town anytime soon. I threw myself into a rigorous routine of running and weightlifting, using the miles of trails surrounding the cabin to get back into fighting shape. A week later, I got a text from David. "Ryan Miller is dead. Funeral was yesterday. We'll keep an eye on your family. Stay safe." I stared at the message, feeling a pang of guilt. My family, I'd caused them so much pain. But it was the only way to keep them safe. 3 weeks later, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I'd lost weight, my hair was longer, and the beard, while still a little scraggly, was coming in nicely. I figured I could risk a trip into town next week. That night, I finally worked up the nerve to watch the video Stone had sent. It was brutal. Ethan, beaten and bloodied, confessed to everything: the affair, the plan to frame me, my involvement in his disappearance. The man behind the camera, dressed in black, his face hidden behind a ski mask, was clearly Stone. At the end of the video, Stone looked directly at the camera, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "I'm coming for you, Miller. And when I find you, I'm going to kill you. Slowly. And then I'm going to destroy everything you hold dear. Your family, your friends, everything." Rage, hot and consuming, surged through me. Stone wasn't just a threat anymore, he was a monster. A cold-blooded killer who enjoyed his work. And the fact that he could turn that rage on and off, it scared the hell out of me. I'd been fooling myself. Stone wouldn't stop until I was dead. And my family, they were next. I couldn't hide forever. I couldn't live the rest of my life in fear. That video, it was a wake-up call. It was time to fight back. I doubled down on my training, pushing myself to the limit, honing my body into a weapon. By week 5, I was ready. I needed supplies and information. I drove into the nearest town, a one-horse town with a dusty main street and more bars than shops. I kept my head down, paid in cash, and made sure to avoid eye contact. I stocked up on essentials, then stopped at a pawn shop on the edge of town. I walked out with a 7mm semi-auto rifle, a 9mm SIG P228 pistol, and enough ammunition to start a small war. I also found a battered old boxing bag and a pair of gloves. Some habits die hard. On my way back to the cabin, I saw a hand-painted sign nailed to a fence post: "Border Collie puppies for sale." I pulled over. Maybe it was crazy, living alone like this, but I'd always wanted a dog. Plus, a dog's senses, hearing, smell, were sharper than any human's. He'd make a good early warning system. I picked out a smart-looking black and white puppy and named him Jess. Back at the cabin, I settled in, set up my new purchases, and made sure Jess had plenty of food and water. Later that night, I finally caved and used the old laptop I'd bought in town to check the internet. I found what I was looking for in the Deadwood Gazette's online archives, an article titled "Drunken Man Burns to Death Near Deadwood." It described how a Jake Carter, a visitor well known to the locals, had gotten drunk, driven his truck off the cliff, and died in a fiery explosion. Sheriff Baxter, in a stunning display of competence, had found no signs of foul play. There were also a couple of articles about Ryan Miller's funeral arrangements, confirmation that David had kept his word. The plan had worked, at least for now. The next 6 months passed in a blur of solitude. Jess, my constant companion, was growing like a weed. He loved running with me on the trails and had even learned to fetch me a beer from the cooler. I ventured into town once a month for supplies, always paying in cash, always keeping my interactions brief. The locals, charmed by my gruff demeanor and impressive beard, had taken to calling me Grizzly Adams. I trained hard, harder than I ever had in the army, pushing myself to my physical and mental limits. My body was leaner, stronger than ever before. I was ready for anything. Or so I thought. One hot July day, I went into town to check my mail, a P.O. box, rented under my new identity, and grab a burger at the diner. I hadn't heard from David in a while, but that wasn't unusual. He'd contacted me a few times, brief texts, letting me know that everything was quiet back in Seattle. My family was safe. While I was at the diner, I picked up a copy of the Willow Creek Chronicle, my hometown newspaper. I skimmed the headlines, my heart sinking as I read the news. Miller's auto repair had burned down 5 months ago under suspicious circumstances. The new owner had kept the name, but it was a gut punch nonetheless. Stone was sending a message. He hadn't forgotten about me or my family. But it was the next article that really shook me. Wealthy family meets tragic end. Echoes of the Kennedy curse? The article described how Jessica Harper Campbell had died a few weeks ago. Apparently, she'd fallen down a flight of stairs at her parents' estate, breaking her neck. On the day of her funeral, her parents, along with General Harper and his wife, were killed in a car crash on their way to the cemetery. That left Ashley Harper Miller as the sole heir to the Harper fortune. The article mentioned that Jessica had been deeply traumatized by her husband's recent self-destruction. Self-destruction? Ethan's death had been ruled a suicide, sure, but there was no way that was an accident. And the fact that Jessica had been so quick to spin it that way, it meant she was involved somehow. More involved than I'd originally thought. 2 more articles caught my eye. The first was a wedding announcement. Ashley Harper Miller had married Mark Davis a month ago. The second was about Richard Campbell. He'd suffered a massive heart attack a few days ago and had been airlifted to Seattle Grace Hospital. I wasn't sure if Stone was involved in Campbell's heart attack, but I knew one thing. It was time to come out of hiding. I had 2 stops to make, Seattle Grace, to see Richard Campbell, and then it was time to pay Stone a little visit. I packed a bag, grabbed my SIG P228, whistled for Jess, and hit the road. Jess, sensing my tension, whined softly as we drove. I scratched him behind the ears, reassuring him that everything was fine. It wasn't, of course, but I wasn't about to tell him that. I pulled up to David's Malibu beach house late that afternoon. He was outside, puttering around in his garden, when I walked up. He didn't recognize me at first, not with the beard, the long hair, and the extra 20 pounds of muscle I'd packed on. But Jess, bless his loyal heart, went ballistic, jumping all over David, barking excitedly. "Lieutenant? Holy, look at you." David chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. We hugged, and David led me inside. He poured us each a beer, and after I settled Jess in the kitchen with a bowl of water and a handful of treats, I told him everything. I spent the next couple of hours recounting the past year. My suspicions about Ashley, the fake PI report, Ethan's confession, my escape from Seattle, the news about the Harpers, and my plan to confront Richard Campbell and Stone. I showed him the reports and the news articles, asking him to keep them safe, just in case. David listened intently, his face grim. "You're walking into the lion's den, son. These special forces guys, they're not to be trifled with. Stone, he's gone rogue." "I know, Top," I said. "But I can't live in fear forever. I have to stop him." David offered to come with me, but I refused. He had a life here, people who cared about him. "Just promise me you'll look out for my family," I pleaded. "If anything happens to me." David sighed, knowing I wouldn't back down. "I promise. But there was one more thing." "Think you can actually do it? Take out a man like Stone?" I looked him dead in the eye. "It's him or me, Top. And I'm not planning on dying today." I'd never considered taking a life before, not really. But Stone was a monster. A cancer that needed to be cut out. Evil triumphs when good men do nothing. I'd been running long enough. It was time to face the music. We spent a few more hours going over the plan, then I hugged David goodbye and hit the road. It was late, almost midnight, by the time I reached Seattle. I checked into a cheap motel, ditched my truck in the parking lot of a nearby shopping mall, and texted David, letting him know I was in position. The next morning, after a restless night, I drove to Seattle Grace Hospital. It was late afternoon by the time I got there. Visiting hours were over, just the way I wanted it. The hospital security was notoriously lax, and my appearance, the beard, the hair, made it easy to blend in with the evening crowd. I'd reviewed the hospital floor plan online and knew exactly where to go. Room 319. I made my way to the 3rd floor, avoiding the nurse's station and the occasional security guard. I slipped into a bathroom down the hall from Richard Campbell's room and waited until the coast was clear. Richard Campbell looked pale, frail. He was hooked up to a million machines, wires snaking across his chest. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, a nurse was bustling in, checking his vitals. I ducked back into the bathroom stall and waited for her to leave. As soon as the door clicked shut, I stepped out. Richard Campbell's eyes fluttered open. "Come closer," he rasped, his voice weak. "Let me see the face of my butcher." I flipped on the bedside lamp. Campbell's eyes widened in recognition. "So, Davis farms out his dirty work now? What a gutless fool. Get on with it, then." "I'm not here to kill you, old man." Campbell stared at me, his brow furrowed. "Miller? Is that you?" He started to weep, but they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of relief. I hadn't expected that. Despite everything that had happened, despite our shared history, Richard Campbell seemed genuinely glad to see me alive. We talked for hours, until the sun rose. I left Seattle Grace Hospital with 2 things. a key to a safe deposit box, and a whole lot of information about Mark Davis and Ashley Harper. I texted David, letting him know I was okay, then crashed at the motel, exhausted. I woke up around 11, showered, and grabbed some breakfast. Then I called Campbell. Go to any branch of Bank of America. Ask for a safe deposit box 112. Tell them you're Jake Carter. Before heading to the bank, I stopped at a barbershop and shaved off my beard and hair. I wasn't hiding anymore. Even with the transformation, you'd have to look twice to recognize me. I was leaner, harder, my eyes cold and calculating. At the bank, I was treated like royalty. They ushered me into a private room, practically bowing as I signed the paperwork. The safe deposit box was small, but it contained everything I needed. A thick envelope and a stack of cash, a lot of cash. I went back to the motel, grabbed some takeout, and sat down to read. My conversation with Richard Campbell had been eye-opening. In the months since I'd died, things had escalated quickly. With Ethan and me out of the picture, Stone had set his sights on General Harper. Apparently, Ashley hadn't run away that night. I'd called her. She'd run straight into Stone's arms. The rumors were that she'd told everyone I'd abandoned her, left her to grieve alone. Stone, of course, had been there to comfort her. They were ecstatic to be together, although Stone was frustrated that he hadn't gotten to kill me himself. Now, with me gone, General Harper was the only obstacle left in his path. Campbell had assured me that the report in the safe deposit box would explain everything. He'd been furious, heartbroken over Ethan's death, but even with all his money and power, he couldn't touch Stone. So he'd hired a team of private investigators, the best in the business, and had them dig into Stone and Ashley's past. This time, no expense was spared. Originally, Campbell had planned on using me as leverage, a way to get back at Stone and the Harpers for destroying his son. But then I conveniently died. He'd been about to take matters into his own hands, hire some less scrupulous people to deal with Stone, when I showed up. He decided to help me instead, convinced that my bloodlust would succeed where his money had failed. He'd called it poetic justice, and said I had more motivation than any hired gun. I'd taken the key, and promised to keep him updated. Now, sitting in the dimly lit motel room, the thick report in my hands, I started reading. A lot of it was stuff I already knew. The details of Stone's troubled childhood, his military career, his relationship with Ashley, the disastrous mission that had ended General Harper's career. But there were details, nuances, things I'd missed, things that made me realize just how thoroughly I'd been played. Campbell had spared no expense. This report was the result of months of meticulous investigation, piecing together a twisted puzzle of love, betrayal, and revenge. It turned out that Mark and Ashley had been instantly drawn to each other all those years ago at Fort Benning. The animosity between Stone and General Harper was real, but contrary to the rumors, Ashley hadn't refused Stone's marriage proposal. They'd actually hatched a plan. Stone would leave the army, become a cop, and they'd run away together. But General Harper had gotten wind of their plan. He'd shipped Stone's unit off to the Middle East, hoping he'd be killed in action. And when Ashley continued to write Stone love letters, declaring her undying devotion, the general had threatened to have Stone brought back in a body bag if she didn't stop. In a rare act of selflessness, Ashley had broken things off, terrified that her father would make good on his threat. Stone, heartbroken, had clung to the hope that they could reconnect when he came home on leave. But Harper had made sure that wouldn't happen. He'd sent Stone's unit on a suicide mission. Stone had survived, but he was never the same. General Harper was eventually forced to resign, but Ashley never forgave him for what he'd done to Stone. Stone's rage, simmering just beneath the surface, finally boiled over. He'd found an outlet for his pain, killing. His military training made him efficient. As for me, I was nothing but a pawn in their twisted game. Ashley, close to her cousin Jessica, knew all about me through Stone. She'd come to Coachella, knowing I'd be there, with the intention of marrying me. It was a way to stay connected to Stone, to keep him in her life, even if it was just through stories and photographs. When our marriage lasted longer than she'd anticipated, she'd started pushing me away, hoping I'd get tired of her and leave. Her endgame? For Stone to return, see her with another man, get jealous, and reclaim her. A lot of this information had come from Jessica. Bitter and heartbroken over Ethan's death, she'd spilled everything, revealing all the secrets Ashley had confided in her over the years. Stone had come back to Seattle seeking two things: Ashley and revenge against General Harper. When he and Ashley reconnected, their old feelings resurface. Ashley got pregnant. Then Ashley had started hinting at an affair with Ethan, hoping to provoke me into either killing him or divorcing her. Either way, it would clear the path for her and Stone. When I'd gone to Stone for help, he jumped at the chance. He'd fabricated the PI report on Ashley, hoping to keep me distracted while he set Ethan up. The plan was to frame Ethan on drug charges, then get Richard Campbell to use his influence to get Ethan off, in exchange for helping Stone destroy General Harper. The plan had backfired when Ashley told me she was pregnant. No one knew about my sterility, not even Ashley. She'd assumed the baby was mine, and she'd been so excited, so convincing. But I knew the truth. She was cheating, and it had to be with Stone. Ethan was just a smokescreen. I wanted revenge. Fast, brutal revenge, for Stone's lies, for Ashley's betrayal. But then it hit me. Stone had intentionally set Ethan up, knowing I'd try to protect him. He wanted to push me into action, make me look guilty. He probably had people watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I'd protected Ethan out of spite, to mess with Stone's plans. I hadn't realized at the time just how crucial Ethan was to Stone's endgame, how he'd planned to use him to take down General Harper and ultimately, me. When Ethan disappeared, Stone went ballistic. He hunted him down, tortured him, got his confession. And then he'd sent me that video, a warning, a threat, a way to goad me into making a reckless move that he could exploit. My call to Ashley, my attempt to warn her, had backfired. She'd told Stone that I knew, that I was onto them. He'd started searching for me, using all his resources, all his connections. If it hadn't been for my quick thinking and David's help, I wouldn't be here now. My family wouldn't be safe. Faking my death had been a stroke of luck. Stone and Ashley had bought it, hook, line, and sinker. I was irrelevant, a ghost. He'd moved on, focused all his energy on General Harper. But then, people started asking questions. They started connecting the dots. Stone and Ashley had figured out that Jessica had been talking, and they decided to eliminate her. Jessica, with her wealth and privilege, had thought she was untouchable. Stone and Ashley had seen an opportunity to get rid of her and the general in one fell swoop, and make it look like an accident. They didn't care about collateral damage. Ashley's mother, her aunt and uncle, they were just in the way. Jessica had gone out for the evening, and when she returned home, Stone was waiting. He'd snapped her neck, staged the scene to look like a drunken fall. Then they'd tampered with the general's car, making sure it crashed on the way to Jessica's funeral. Just like that, the Harper family was gone. Ashley inherited everything: money, property, political connections. Stone had eliminated all his enemies. Except for Richard Campbell. After a brief period of mourning, probably fake, Stone and Ashley had gotten married. The only glitch in their perfect plan had been Ashley's miscarriage. I'd never know if it had been a natural loss or if Ashley, suspecting the baby wasn't Stone's, had taken matters into her own hands. Stone had probably planned to get rid of Campbell eventually, tying up all the loose ends. But then Campbell had his heart attack, a stroke of luck that must have felt like a gift from the gods. He could die in peace, in a hospital bed, without Stone having to lift a finger. I'd thought about walking away, disappearing for good. Starting over. But then I thought about my family, my parents, Sarah. If Stone ever got bored, if he ever decided he needed a new challenge, they'd be next. No. My dad always said, when you've got a diseased dog, the kindest thing you can do is put it down. It was time to end this. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was walking towards my own execution. After a quick shower, I called David. I'm going after Stone. I'm going to ambush him at the Harper estate. He and Ashley moved in after her aunt and uncle died. And Stone's on leave this week, so he should be there. Are you sure about this, Lieutenant? David's voice was tight with worry. I have to do this, Top. For my family. For Ethan. For myself. Be careful, son. And if anything happens, I'll take care of Jess. And your family. I hung up the phone, my heart heavy. I spent the rest of the day going over my plan, checking my gear, making sure everything was in place. As soon as it was dark, I changed into black tactical gear, grabbed my weapons, and left the motel. I drove through the empty streets of Seattle, heading towards the Hamptons, where the Harper estate stood like a monument to wealth and privilege. I couldn't help but think about how much had changed since those innocent days of cruising around with Stone, dreaming of a future that would never be. I parked a mile down the road from the estate, grabbed my gear, and made my way through the woods. I'd been to the Harper house a few times when I was dating Ashley, so I knew the layout pretty well. I reached the perimeter fence and pulled out my night vision goggles. There she was, Ashley, pulling out of the driveway in her BMW. I waited 5 minutes, just to be sure Ashley wasn't coming back. Then I crept towards the house, keeping to the shadows. I peeked through a window. Stone was in the dining room, sitting at the table, a glass of red wine in his hand. He was reading a stack of papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. I circled around to the garage, picked the lock on the side door, and slipped inside. I stayed low, moving silently through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. Stone's back was to me. He was still engrossed in his paperwork. This was it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I might have to shoot him in the back. There wouldn't be time for explanations, for justifications. It was him or me. I raised my SIG P228, aiming for center mass. Stone must have sensed me. He whirled around, dropping to the floor, his hand already reaching for the Glock strapped to his ankle. My first shot went wide, shattering a vase on the sideboard. Stone returned fire, a deafening roar that echoed through the house. A searing pain exploded in my left shoulder. I was hit. Stone was armed. Even on vacation, the son of a bitch was ready for war. I knew I was outmatched. I scrambled for cover, firing blindly as I ran for the garage door. Suddenly, the lights went out. I tripped over something, a toolbox, maybe, and went sprawling. 4 shots slammed into the garage door, right where I'd been a second earlier. I was trapped, bleeding, the metallic taste of fear flooding my mouth. Stone was coming for me. I rolled over, my back against the wall, my weapon clutched in my trembling hand. I squeezed the trigger, firing blindly towards the sound of Stone's footsteps. Silence. Then, the driveway lights flickered on, bathing the garage in a harsh, white light. Stone was lying on the floor, a few feet away, dazed. A bullet had grazed his head. A combat knife lay on the floor between us. I lunged for it, adrenaline surging through me. Stone's eyes fluttered open. "Never bring a knife to a gunfight, Miller." He sneered. But before he could move, a spray of blood splattered across the garage floor. Stone's eyes widened in surprise, then glazed over. He slumped to the floor, dead. David stood in the doorway, a smoking shotgun in his hands. He'd come just in time. He dragged me outside, patched me up as best he could, then bundled me into the back of his truck. He went back inside for a few minutes, then got behind the wheel and sped off. I woke up in David's guest room, disoriented, my shoulder throbbing. A retired doctor friend of David's had stitched me up. Apparently, I'd been out cold for days. Stone was dead. I spent a few weeks recuperating at the Malibu beach house, then I went back to Last Chance, eager to see Jess. I followed the news of Stone's death online. The police had concluded that 2 armed intruders had broken into the Harper estate and ambushed Stone. No suspects, no leads. David had cleaned up the crime scene, erased any evidence of our involvement. Stone was given a hero's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dead was dead. I'd planned to confront Ashley, tell her everything. But she beat me to it. True to her nature, she'd chosen the easy way out. She'd taken Stone's Glock and put a bullet through her head. They'd found a note, a pathetic little scribble. "I can't live without him." It felt hollow. I didn't get to confront her, to see the fear in her eyes as I told her that I knew everything. But then again, Ashley had always been one step ahead. Now, I'm driving back to Malibu. Jess is beside me, his head resting on my lap, his tail thumping happily against the seat. I'm going to see David. Sarah's coming down from Portland. My parents are flying in from Willow Creek. A family reunion. Ryan Miller is dead, but Jess doesn't care. As long as Jake Carter is alive, he's happy. As I drive, I think about love, friendship, and the devastating power of betrayal. But the past is the past. It doesn't define my future. I will survive. As the dust settles on a life marked by betrayal and vengeance, Ryan Miller, or Jake Carter, finds himself standing at the crossroads of a new beginning. With the shadows of his past finally behind him, he embraces a future filled with hope and a renewed sense of purpose. Surrounded by those who truly matter, Ryan learns that survival isn't just about escaping the enemy. It's about finding the strength to rebuild and move forward. Join us in the final chapter of this gripping saga, where love, loyalty, and redemption take center stage. This isn't just the end of a story, it's the start of a new life.